Thank you, everyone. Well, we're living in interesting times, eh? How boring it would be if we didn't have these challenges in front of us, right? I think it's a good time to be alive and a good time to be doing business between these dynamic countries of US and Mexico. These colliding cultures are creating opportunity that we have yet to unfold and even understand. Now, you've heard a lot this morning, a lot of data about how it's affecting our various industries. A lot of experts are putting forth their studies and data on how the projections might turn out, may not turn out. If I leave you today with the impression that I have a political preference on how this goes, I've not done my job. What I'm going to do is arm you with some information that you can take home with you. It's not whether this is good or bad, it's the facts that are on the table and how we're going to deal with them that's important. So my goal is to give you that data in a positive way so we can see what the outcome potentially will be. None of us know exactly what's going to happen, but I promise you one thing, it's not going to happen as fast as you may think it's going to happen, and it's not going to be nearly as bad as you might fear. So we have a lot of opportunities in this crisis, and we want to be sure we seize the moment. The real question is, what is the worst case scenario? And how would that worst case scenario turn out? How would it look? And it's just not that bad when you dig into the numbers. Now, we've heard a lot about NAFTA and how wonderful NAFTA has been, but I was around for a while before NAFTA became into play. This is me 7 years before NAFTA began. I want you to note the air of confidence and the look of determination on my face, okay? And the dark hair. Now, if you think NAFTA has been easy, look at me now, all right? We were promised a whole lot of things with NAFTA, that things were going to be smooth and the borders were going to be open and trade was going to be easy and moving back and forth with our products was going to be a commonplace. Those of you who do this on a daily basis know that's not exactly how it's turned out. It is said that El Paso alone lost more than 20,000 jobs when NAFTA was implemented. An interesting thing happened, that as those 20,000 jobs were being lost in the manufacturing sector, in 1994, the unemployment rate in El Paso was 12%. By year 2000, it was in the area of 7%, and today at 5%. So with the change that came in losing those jobs, and they didn't all go to Mexico, they scattered all over the world, primarily the textile and electronics industry. So as those jobs left, there was a backfill of jobs that occurred in the service sector, and those were higher paying jobs. So the point is that for every action, there's a reaction, and that is what creates the opportunity. Change can be uncomfortable, especially when you're not in control of it. But as businessmen and women, we have to seek those opportunities, look where the change is occurring, and develop opportunity where sometimes it may look like it's impossible. The history of NAFTA. It was envisioned as a way to reduce trade costs, increase business, and help North America be more competitive in the marketplace. I think that probably was true, and that it did happen that way. But it took a long time to develop NAFTA. Negotiations started as early as 1986. The program was not under negotiations until 1989. It was 1994 before it was enacted. It took 5 years of a whole lot of smart people working on it to develop all the what ifs and how it would work. So as we see this change, even though it's, okay, today is the change, that does not mean it's implemented expeditiously, because the people in charge have got to be cautious, because they don't want to put a bunch of companies out of business. They want to allow companies to evolve and be able to react to those changes. It was envisioned, the objectives were to eliminate barriers, cross-border barriers, to trade and facilitate cross-border movement in goods and services, and promote conditions of fair competition and trade on a global basis. And I'd say the second part is true, but if any of you in this room feel like that it facilitated ease of trade across the border, we're doing more paperwork, we got more staff, more energy, more people facilitating those movements than ever before. So it didn't exactly reduce those effects, but it has a positive effect. When I told you El Paso lost 20,000 jobs, at the same time in 1994 there was a peso devaluation. That triggered a banking crisis. And the economists refer to it as the tequila crisis. And it wasn't so bad in the sense that it occurred in Mexico, the tequila crisis. And one of my favorite economists from UTEP says, but El Paso and the other border regions got the hangover out of that. So there's always a cause and effect, but it recovered quickly and made a difference in all of our lives as trade began to increase. Now I want to point out also that NAFTA gets credit for all of the increased trade between the US and Mexico. But let's bear in mind that the trade between US and Mexico was on a fast pace anyway. So did NAFTA get, or should it get, full credit for all of those changes? Possibly not. We may be in the same position or relatively the same with or without NAFTA. So we shouldn't be so fearful about what would happen if NAFTA wasn't here. What if NAFTA is renegotiated? It is not the Holy Grail. There was life before and there would be life after should that possibility occur. Now I'm encouraged, and you heard Sergio Hornelas Sr. speak just before the break about Wilbur Ross. He is Trump's pick for the Secretary of Commerce, which facilitates trade, and really is the person that would be in charge of negotiating any deals related to redoing NAFTA or implementing new rules, especially as related to duties and tariffs, etc. Wilbur Ross is a multi-billionaire that made his fortune taking over poorly ran companies and turning them around. And part of his initiative was building factories in Mexico and moving production to a more productive environment. Preliminary, it looks like he's a friend of Mexico. He's not such a good friend of China and some of the other Asian Pacific countries. So we could have done worse. I think we've got a good guy out of this chaos. He has to be yet confirmed, but once he's in place, I think we'll see somebody that understands the importance of trade between our two countries and will help facilitate that and improvement. Now, his attack, what we see preliminarily, are based around the rules of origin. Let me explain that just a little bit. We heard a little bit about it earlier, but let me give you an example. What irritates him is that Asian countries and others are able to import product into Mexico duty-free. Now, how does that work? Without the permission of the other two countries, US and Canada, Mexico implemented what is referred to as the sectorial program. That was to attract foreign investment from Asian countries and other countries as well, but if it was a product or a component that was not made in Mexico, was not considered a competitive product to Mexico, Mexico would say, sure, bring it on in, because it helps create employment, foreign investment, and instead of it being an 18% duty rate coming into Mexico, they reduced it to 2% or sometimes 0%. And they called it the sectorial initiative, the sectorial programs. Well, some of the Asian countries took advantage of that and are still taking advantage of that. It's a loophole in NAFTA. All agreements have loopholes, right? I mean, tax codes, whatever it is, there's ways you can maneuver to deal with them in a positive way. Well, these countries have taken advantage of it. Let's say an instrument cluster for an automobile, and let's say it's made in China or Japan or Asia Pacific country. They can import it into Mexico under the sectorial program duty-free. It goes into a car, and that car qualifies as under NAFTA. So the car can be imported into the United States duty-free. So those components coming from a non-NAFTA country gets into Mexico duty-free under the sectorial, gets installed in the product, imported into the US duty-free. That's a loophole. And that's where we see Wilbur Ross and his team will focus on NAFTA. So when we're talking about renegotiations of NAFTA, I think that's where the target will be. And that's not bad for us. Just think about it. If it's harder for an outside supplier, let's say from China, and I'm not beating up China, this is just using it as an example because it's the biggest guy out there. So we will increase the cost of them importing their product into the US or into North America, into Mexico. That will give suppliers that are already here, US or Mexico, more opportunity. So we're going to see increased foreign investment from North American companies in Mexico and the US that will supply that chain because they can do it without duty. So it's the action and the reaction. If we tax what's coming from the Asian countries and close those loopholes, it's going to create opportunity for the companies that are already here and the ones that want to be here. And we'll see those Asian companies try to establish themselves in North America, which we're already seeing a migration. So Wilbur Ross, not so bad. The attack on NAFTA, not so bad. We can see it evolving in a positive way. Remember, I showed you a slide earlier, that debonair young man working 7 years before NAFTA even existed. If NAFTA didn't exist, we would just go back to where we were. When we moved product from the United States into Mexico under what was referred to as subchapter 9802. Some people remember 807. If you're old enough in this room, you remember some of those codes that we operated under. And it worked. We moved product across the border, and it was under the harmonized tariff code where if it's US product going into Mexico, and then it comes back from Mexico into the United States, you can't tax it because it's already US components, right? So you only imply duty on the value added, meaning the foreign content of the labor and the overhead that occurred in Mexico. We were paying an average of about 2.5% of tax on products that we were bringing back into the United States. And that's workable. That was not a barrier to trade. It facilitated trade under this 9802 program. So if NAFTA wasn't there, if NAFTA is modified, there's ways that will continue. And we still today operate under 9802 in many sectors, especially textiles, steel. We still use 9802 as the trade mechanism to bring it back and forth. So theoretically, it would just stay there. Now we got to talk about this little fellow. There always seems to be an elephant in the room that is not clear-cut on what's going on. I had the opportunity to spend about 15 minutes of private time with Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House for the United States, on Sunday. And the topic of conversation between us was the border adjustment tax. Now, Paul Ryan is all over this. Paul Ryan was head of the Ways and Means Committee before he became Speaker of the House. And that's the committee that would design the tax that they're focusing on, called the border adjustment tax. Now, there's a lot of people against it. There's a lot of people for it. In the US administration, it would take only a few Republican naysayers to kill it before it could become ineffective. What would happen if it did? So the concept behind the border adjustment tax is a proposed 20%. Now that sounds horrible. How could we possibly live with the cost of our product being taxed 20% when it comes back into the US. Well, it's kind of an innovative concept as he explained it, and I had him explain it to me twice because my hard head, it was a little hard for me to get around how this was going to work and be possible without putting a bunch of companies out of business. But the idea is that when you export to Mexico, you're going to get a credit. You're not going to pay anything right then or get a credit that's going to result in cash right then. And then when you import from Mexico, you get a debit. And that would be balanced at the end of the year in a tax return. So it'd be a balance of imports and exports. And we would only pay the 20% on our deficit. So let's take it back and look at 9802. We can import into Mexico. That's an export. We get a credit. We add value, we bring it back, it's a debit, or vice versa. So the tax that we would pay would just be on the value added. So if we take the example that we're talking about, you receive a credit on the annual tax return for products exported. And some companies do a lot of exportation. Some companies only do importations. You receive a debit and on your annual tax return for products imported. The idea is to create more incentive to do exports rather than be importing from a foreign country. Example, companies send materials to Mexico and receive a credit. Companies assemble finished products, bring them back, and they receive into the US and receive a debit. The tax is applied on the difference. Here's an example. One of the executives at Tecma bought a washing machine at Best Buy the other day ago, and the price was about $800, and so this ended up being our example for this particular case. All right, let's think about it in real terms. It's an $800 washing machine. Now, the materials and labor for that came out to a total of about $240. $96 of that were US components that were sent into Mexico to make the product originally. The $144 was the foreign content that was added. That's components from all over the world and the labor component. That when that comes into the US, that foreign component will be taxed at 20%. That sounds horrible, but look at the reality. That's $29. $29 on an $800 item. So then you got the marketing and sales and the freight and the profit that's all built in that is not part of the VAT tax. So it increases the cost of that washing machine $29. Not so bad. That's still competitive. It's still going to beat any way you could make that washing machine and get it to the United States for any other price. Mexico has a tremendous advantage over any of these proposed profiles. So we just need to stay calm and watch this play out. The worst case scenario is just not that bad. When we were talking to Paul Ryan, he was reassuring me that this was going to be a slow rollout, that it would not be instantaneous and it's not one day to the next. Now, when I look back at NAFTA and how that worked, it was exactly this way. We likened it to an onion. And when you peel a leaf off the onion, that represents one of the tariff codes. It took years to implement NAFTA. I mean, some of the effects took 8-9 years before it was fully implemented. So if we see smart people being in control of this, implementing the VAT tax, and unrolling it like peeling the leaves off of an onion, we can all react to it and better ourselves, seek opportunities within that change, and grow our businesses as a result of it. So this isn't going to happen overnight. It's not going to be, boom, you got this tax in front of us. It's going to give us all time to react. And let me back up on this wash machine example. If you take that wash machine you brought into the United States and paid the $29, and so you've gotten a debit for having it built in Mexico. If you ship it to Canada, you get a credit back. If you ship it to Australia, you get a credit. So it's not just black and white. All that will be balanced out in the tax return at the end of the year. So remember the onion concept. Now this is interesting. Where was your car made? It is said that 40% of all the cars coming out of Mexico is of U.S. content. You look at the thousands, the 10,000 parts that are in an automobile that it takes to assemble it, and you try to unravel that, and you think of the concept that truly we're Siamese twins. To separate us at this point in our life, since 1994, that would almost be impossible. So we can believe that this is going to continue. We can have passion in it. Just watch, again, the opportunity that it's going to create as this evolves. So we're not able to change the course and change the tide. Of course, we're talking to our congressman. We are writing letters. We're sending people to Washington to testify on our behalf. But truly, the cards are in play. So as business people, we've got to see where the cards are being played and how we're best going to play them. And we have an ace. And it's not up our sleeve. You can see the little bulldog down in the corner there. He's got it in his toe. All right? That's an ace of spades. Our ace is the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. and those of us in this industry. And we will play that ace to our benefit as this unfolds. NAFTA and the BAT, they're going to evolve. They're going to change. Embrace change. Let's not be static. You've all been in companies before where there's change, where there's a new manager that comes in and starts implementing change. There's people that can adjust to change, and there's people that resist it. I encourage us all to adjust, to embrace the change, and it will benefit us all in the long run. In 31 years in this business, I have seen inflation, devaluations, several of them in Mexico, 3 major recessions, the last one being the most horrible. We saw the violence period. I want to remind those in this room, and all of even the young people in this room can remember that just a few years ago, it was dark days in our industry. We had the violence period on top of the Great Recession. There wasn't any business moving other than what was here. Nobody was coming. So when you think about this change, how horrible it could possibly be, just remember, this isn't nearly as bad as what we've seen. We've been through multiple presidential administrations on both sides of the border, political fights, assassinations, all kinds of things. And every year in those 31 years, except the exception of 2009, which was the bottom of the Great Recession, trade increased between our two countries. For 2016, I think the number will come in over $600 billion of trade between our two countries. And again, it's the effect of there's no way you can stop this. This reminds me of when I was a child, actually as a big child, working on our family farm, and we would build a stock pond for the cattle. And it would be a couple of acre water lake, and it was just amazing that within a year or two, you could fish in that pond and catch fish. And I asked my dad, I said, how in the world did those fish get in there? And he would explain that it's just life. You create the pond, you create opportunity, and life just forms. It comes. It just evolves. And there's no way you can stop it. There's no way you can stop creatures from growing and prospering in that pond of water. So I say it a lot, and I believe in it, that trade is like life itself. All right? If there's a will, there's a way. You can't stop trade. Where there's opportunity, it will flourish. We may hit high center once in a while and get stuck and not sure which way we're going to go. All right? But we can make a difference, and we can move forward with this changing tide, and we must embrace it at every opportunity. One vision, one mission, and one North America is what we're all about. Thank you very much.